Testing 1 2 3. Can you guys hear us? Send a thumbs up or hello in the chat room, and we'll be turning on the camera in just another minute.
And thanks for being here, Joe. We appreciate it.
Okay. Did somebody hear us? Hopefully so.
People love our videos. I like that part.
They are beautiful videos.
Okay, I
What's not
see
to
some
love?
thumbs up. That might be somebody heard us. Hopefully.
Thumbs up. Standing by.
Standing by. Thumbs up.
Yep.
Yep. Okay,
Yay.
so we could hear. So let's go switch over here.
Fantastic.
Here we are. Hey.
Hi.
And let me turn on our names so we could know who's here, right? Ta-da!
Well, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I am Cherie of Technomadia,
I'm Chris.
and this is Kim Russo of
Hi.
the Great Loop American Great Loop Association.
AGLCA is how we refer to it.
That's right. Thank you
And-
for having me. This is great.
And this is a very rare treat for us to have guests on board. Why not? Who want to join us on camera?
Well, I didn't say I wanted to, but you kind of twisted my arm a little bit.
We just did a guest appearance on her podcast. We just finished recording that, and
Right.
now we're subjecting her in return to being live on YouTube.
Fun for everyone.
But we get so many questions about this boating adventure that we're on, the Great Loop, that we thought it'd be fun to talk about. What is the Great Loop?
What is the Great Loop? Let's start over here then. Here, I'll give you the quick little. We can all look over the top of this here and see. What is the Great Loop? It's the adventure of a lifetime. I guess this is straight from your website here, right?
It is, yes. That's the header from our website. But it is the adventure of a lifetime, for sure.
Yes. And at the pace we're going, it might actually
Might
be
be
a
our
lifetime.
lifetime.
Could be, but that's okay, as long as you're enjoying it.
Right. So, elevator pitch. What is the Great Loop?
Great Loop is about a 6,000-mile boat trip. You do aboard your own boat at your own pace. Usually a couple aboard, but we encourage everybody to do it their own way, and it is truly an adventure of a lifetime. You're circumnavigating the eastern part of the U.S. and often parts of Canada as well. So really the eastern part of the U.S. is an island, which most people don't realize.
Yes, and so you're in a boat, but you're going through all these different lakes and different locks and different canals. Some of them are hundreds of years old.
Yes.
And so it's a trip through history. It's a trip through a lot of places that are really off the beaten path.
Yeah, it's really seeing this country and parts of Canada from a really different perspective. Most people are seeing it from the highways, but if you're on a boat and you're doing the Great Loop, you're seeing it from the waterways, which for a lot of these small historic towns is really how they were settled, was from the water outward.
Right.
So you're
Yeah.
really seeing the historical parts of the towns.
So I'll bring up the little map here, and we just kind of describe the overall what is the loop here. So we've got kind of the traditional formula. You want to talk kind of people through the different phases and
Yeah,
what that
sure.
looks
If
like
you can,
there?
if you can see the green there on that map, that is representative of the East Coast, which is where you typically would want to be in spring. It's somewhat traditional to do this on a 1-year timeline because there's some seasonality to it. You of course want to be in Canada when it's warm in the summer.
Not in January.
Probably not. Most things will be closed in Canada, most of the boating facilities. And of course, Florida makes sense in the winter. So if you are on a 1-year time frame, you'd be heading up the East Coast in the spring, which is the green that you see there
that'd
on the
be
map. That would be the
through
Atlantic
Georgia,
Intracoastal Waterway.
Carolinas,
Yep.
and all the way up into New York.
Up
it looks
into
like.
Chesapeake Bay,
Mhm.
around New Jersey, into New York Harbor.
Okay.
From there, you take the New York State canals. I'm sorry, Hudson River, which will take you to the New York State canals. Most will go through the Erie Canal into the Oswego Canal to Lake Ontario.
Okay.
They'll take that into Canada, do the very historic Trent Severn Waterway to Georgian Bay. That lets out into Lake Huron, continue on to Lake Michigan, down through Chicago, down the river systems, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico
So-
and around Florida.
So it's Canada in the summer, the western rivers in the fall, and then Florida in the winter. It's actually fits nicely with following perfect temperatures.
It does. In fact, we had a boat a few years ago called Chasing 80 because they were chasing 80 degrees all the way
Nice.
around the loop looking for those great temperatures.
So, most loopers right now are up in that red portion.
They are. In fact, we had an event about a week and a half ago at the gateway to the Trent Severn, which is Trent Port Marina, and saw a many loopers there, and many were kind of coming behind. So it's a very social trip because of that. If people are on this seasonal schedule, they're repeatedly running into the same people.
Hopefully
every
not
couple of
literally.
months.
Yes.
Not literally. Most of the time, not literally, but occasionally, depending on what the currents are doing.
Right.
And before I leave this image here, then these burgees on the side, this is how loopers identify each other. You see these are little flags you put in the front of your boat, and you get a white one if you are starting out. And then what do the gold and platinum ones mean?
Gold is for somebody who's completed the entire route one time.
They call it crossing your wake.
We call it crossing your wake because you've completed the circle and kind of crossed where your wake would have been left when you started. So gold is for people who have completed the entire route. The silver looking one is actually platinum, and that is for people who have completed it more than once.
And you're missing the other one, the dirty and tattered one for the slow loopers who are taking multiple years before they change a white to a gold.
Yes, those
brown.
are kind of a gray tinged.
Yes, ours is
That's
already
ours.
there. Ours is fading. Because we started our loop in Punta Gorda, Florida, back in April 2017 is when we consider our starting. And we are now in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yay, welcome to Charleston.
We just finished our first 1,000 miles of the loop.
So
2.5%
now.
So we're up to 15% because we're considering 6,000 miles to be about
right.
About right. So yeah, my logbook came up and said, "You just did 1,000 miles." Like, oh yay!
That's a big milestone.
It
though.
is.
It really is.
And doing it slow is a great way to
Wonderful
do
way to
it.
do
Like
it.
I said, we really encourage everybody to set their own pace and do it in a way that is enjoyable to you. There's no right or wrong way, even though it might be somewhat typical to do it in a year
Right.
with a couple on a trawler. That's not the only way to do it.
Definitely not.
Talking about typical, would you say that most loopers, however, are following the seasonal path?
I would say yes. Most loopers are, but we definitely are seeing a shift to where people are taking multiple years because they don't want to rush through it. And especially some of the waterways, some of the issues with things closing for maintenance, some locks that you can't get through, is kind of causing people to rethink those plans and perhaps spend a whole summer on the Great Lakes like we saw on the map, and then perhaps store the boat or head back further south and then spend a second summer on the Great Lakes. There's so much boating to do on the Great Lakes that you really just can't see everything in one season. And we've actually seen a trend towards more people finishing and then going around a second time because they feel like they've missed some of the things they really wanted to see.
So if you're following the loop in a traditional manner, about how many days of the year are you actually in transit and actually
that's a great question.
making motion?
So if they do it in about a year, most people average cruising roughly every third day. Now they may cruise 2 in a row and then stop for a week, but roughly every third day. So it's usually somewhere between 120 and 150 days actually moving, sometimes more. The average looper we typically figure about 50 miles a day is the distance they'll travel.
And we like to travel
15
to 20 miles a day and stay a week or a month. So yeah,
And that's fine.
hashtag slooper.
Right.
And I love that, by the way. I just saw that the other day.
We're making it a thing. Sloopers.
Slow loopers, yes.
So, we come from an RVing world.
Right.
And in a typical year, we might do 6,000 or 7,000 miles in an RV at our pace. But we're moving at 55, 60 miles per hour.
Right.
On a boat, we're moving 7 or 8 miles per hour.
Yep.
That's like 40,000 RVing miles in a year. That's a lot of time actually spent driving. Now, the cool thing about boating is when you're driving, that is really part of the journey because you are moving slow. You're really getting to see the places you're going.
You're getting to see it, but you're also a little bit more off the beaten path. So even though you've got your electronic navigation, you still are, in a very different sense than on the roadways, charting a course, and the road less traveled, so to speak.
Because like we've experienced on the ICW is some days we might only see one other boat and stuff, one other cruising boat or none sometimes when we're on these paths. Whereas on a highway, it's there's people. And one other interesting contrast between RVing and doing the loop is on the loop there's really not many alternate paths. There's a couple of really great side trips and stuff, but everybody's either basically on the same course. You're going north and kind of following this clockwise circle or counterclockwise circle. RVing, people can go this way, that way, this way, that way.
Right. Yeah, and the waterways, you're right. Everybody's pretty much following the same path. You've been on the Atlantic Intercoastal for a little while now, so you know it kind of twists and turns.
Yes.
So there are other options, but to stay on the Great Loop route, you are going in a very specific place. But it's a little bit different. I think people envision, you're going for 7 miles an hour maybe, and picture it being like on an interstate for that long, that slow.
Oh no, it's beautiful.
And it's a little bit different because A, you're not in a hurry to get anywhere, but B, it's not. There's no road signs that say exit here. You know, you kind of have to pay attention to what you're doing.
There's no welcome signs to new states.
There's not.
Yeah.
No.
That was
disappointing,
I
isn't it?
know. 2 years we took us to go from Florida into Georgia, and there's no welcome sign.
Yep. They're happy to have you, I promise.
So what is the AGLCA then? You know, the Great Loop's been around for a long time, but where's the AGLCA come into this?
The AGLCA is actually about to celebrate its 20th anniversary. It was founded by a couple who were somewhat credited with popularizing the modern day Great Loop. They did the Great Loop, I believe, around 97, 98, and wrote a book about it. It's called Honey, Let's Get a Boat, kind of a famous, iconic book about the Great Loop. And after they wrote that, they started the association and had a few events because people just wanted to get together and talk about their experiences. And it's grown from there to, we've had, over the course of time, members come and go, of course. But we've had 18,000 plus memberships, and we currently have about 4,000 active memberships. And a membership is essentially a boat hold, so the two of you would be one membership. So there's a lot of people interested in the Great Loop right now.
And absolutely, and at any given time, your records indicate about how many people are actively in pursuit of the loop.
500 to 600 tell us in our database that they are in progress, and that means different things to different people. You know, for example, I'm not a full-time cruiser yet. But I do cruise the Atlantic and Intracoastal Waterway when I can, so I could consider myself in progress. Some people would wait till they felt like they were really on their way, but everything about the loop is do it your own way.
Right.
So whatever is meaningful to you, if you're in progress, you're in progress.
Yes.
Right.
So about 500 to 600 in our database call themselves in progress. Some may forget to change that. You know, that's an estimate, I would say. And there's certainly some people who do the loop without joining, and we have no way to account for them.
Yeah. And then how many complete? How many gold burgees and platinum burgees a year?
Right now, it's about 150 a year. 2017 was actually the peak we've seen. That was 153, if I'm not mistaken. Last year was close to that, about 147.
And how many people climb Mount Everest every year?
Oh gosh, now you're taxing my memory. It's more than that.
Yes.
I want to say it's 500 maybe.
Okay,
I
so
actually have a slide that I use in some
Yes,
of my
I know. So that's-
presentations that lists
For
that. but-
something that is so easily accessible to do the Great Loop, that is a surprisingly low number of people
Good.
actually doing it every year when you compare it to something like Mount
Yes.
Everest
It
or
is a very
hiking the
unique,
Appalachian Trail
Yes.
or something like that.
a
which
very
are-
unique adventure.
Well, you
for
don't
sure.
need a boat to climb Mount Everest. I mean, it takes less
But,
gear, right?
a boat,
Different kind of gear, I think.
yeah. A boat would make it a lot more difficult, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little bit. Okay, so the typical looper.
Yeah.
I mean, in our experience, they tend to be retired.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like something that people have planned for a long time. It's kind
the
of the
retirement
Yes.
trip.
It is that. I think another reason that it's very typical for loopers to be retired is that they have more time than many people who are still working and still have children in the house and all those things that, you know, the life that gets in the way of pursuing a dream like
Right.
this. So that's one reason that they tend to be retirees. I think retirees also have the lifestyle and often the funds to be able to do this.
Right.
Not everyone has a job that's suitable to working aboard. You two are very fortunate in that. So for those who don't, taking a year off and being able to afford to take that year off is kind of a double whammy for some. So I think that's the main reason it traditionally has been retirees. But we are seeing some changes
Yeah,
to
there's
that.
been some actual families that have done it with their kids, school-age kids, doing the loop.
There, 3 years ago, there were 3 really great families out there who have remained active. One kept right on going, and they still are living aboard with their daughters. One really, really neat family is on their second time around now. They stopped for a little while. They've got 4 daughters, one who has special needs, and
Wow.
the 4 daughters and the 2 parents live aboard their, I believe it's a 32-foot Bayliner.
Wow.
And
Wow.
love every minute of it.
Nice.
So yeah, more families, and I think it's easier to do that now because technology is letting people homeschool aboard a boat. And
Right.
what an education for kids. You know,
Right.
they're visiting where history happened instead of reading about it. So the kids that are neatest kids are boat kids.
Yeah.
Love them. We're seeing some younger people do it almost as a gap year, kind of, my generation's backpacking through Europe. A similar twist on that. So there was actually an article about 2 college-age girls in Boat US magazine, I believe it was,
On a
who did
sailboat,
it
right?
recently on a sailboat.
Yes, we actually met them in Cedar Key.
Oh, right.
Remember?
Yes,
Yeah.
and there were two girls that were kind of their mentors who did it 3 or 4 years ago. That had a great blog while they did it. So we're seeing some younger people, and then technology, as you both know, is allowing people to work aboard much more easily than they could have even 5 years ago,
Right.
even 10 years ago for sure. So that's changing the demographic, I think, in a really good way.
Right. And if you're doing it in the 1 year cycle, it is a huge expense to put aside for that year. And you've got fuel, you've got marina costs if you're doing that, maintenance on the boat, purchasing the boat. So for a lot of people, it's something they do want to save up for.
Particularly if you're doing it in 1 year, you're doing a lot of one-night stays. And at marinas, the economics of one-night stays are vastly different than the economics of 1 week or 1 month stays.
Very much so.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes a month is not much more than 4 or 5 days.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is one way that people do it. They save up for it. It is an adventure of a lifetime that they're seeing. But you're also seeing a trend of people doing it in different ways. Breaking it up in sections and
Absolutely
slooping.
doing it in sections. Slooping is a
Slooping.
great thing. I love the word. But people are breaking it up in sections because another kind of downfall to the 1 year kind of traditional time frame is that you can't spend as long as you might like to in individual places.
Oh, yeah.
I always use the Chesapeake for an example because there's so much boating and so many nooks and crannies, and you can't possibly finish everything on the Chesapeake and still get up into Canada and out the other side before winter comes. So by doing it in segments, you can spend as much time as you want in each place. Segments also can be a little bit more work friendly for people who do still have a more traditional job that need to go to an office or
work
see
remotely
clients or
or
something like that on a
Yeah.
fairly regular basis. So yeah, that's
and doing it in segments also presents challenge because you're not moving with the seasons anymore. So you are coming into what are you going to do for hurricane season if you're in the south?
True.
What are you going to do for winter if you're up in Canada in January?
you're going to get out of there, or you're going to pull the boat out of the water
Right,
because it will
right.
freeze.
So these are logistics. So a lot of
Logistics
people
for
who are
sure.
doing it in segments tend to have still a home boat, some sort of home base that they go back to
Absolutely.
when it's not the ideal boating season where they are.
Yes, because it is certainly not fun to live aboard a boat that's been pulled and stored for the winter. Not the place you want to be is not inside that storage shed on the boat. So
So, yeah.
But the cost and the time frame we're seeing, besides non-traditional loopers from a demographic perspective, we're kind of seeing some non-traditional boats.
Oh.
And
What is the traditional boat then?
Lots of trawlers. That has been the tradition because they're roomy, they're fuel efficient. We're seeing a lot more motor yachts, a lot of Bayliners, cruiser yachts. Great boats for the Great Loop. They can still be operated fuel efficiently, which you two obviously know.
You don't have to go fast just because they can.
Exactly. Fuel prices are still relatively low, so we're seeing a lot more what has been dubbed as go fast boats out there. But we've seen everything in the past year from somebody who did it in a dinghy to a gentleman from England who is about to finish kayaking the loop. He's about to cross his wake.
Wow, small wake.
Small little wake,
But it's wake.
but he will cross it. We had an older gentleman, about 80, and he did it in segments. He did it over summers, but in 4 segments, completed the whole Great Loop aboard a 14-foot Skerry that he built himself, sailed it when he had enough wind to, and rode it the rest of the time. So it was not
Human
engine powered.
Oh my gosh.
Wind and human powered. So essentially, you can do this in anything that is seaworthy. And that makes you happy and comfortable. It's all about making it your own.
Yes.
There's no point in doing it in a trawler going 6 miles an hour if that's not going to give you pleasure. If going fast is your thing, go fast. It's
Right.
it's completely up to you.
Although big chunks of the loop are no wake zones, so.
Well, that is true.
Yes.
So be cautious when you're going fast and slow down when you see that no wake sign.
Definitely. So, is there anything else you would like to share? So, the Great Loop organization, the AGLCA, what are some of the
What are the
resources
benefits?
that
Yeah, what do you
you
do?
help loopers out with?
A lot of looping is about the camaraderie, so we kind of help make those connections. So there's a whole section on our website for connections. A lot of it is our forum, which is kind of an older form of social media, so to speak, but it gives a little bit more opportunity for kind of in-depth answers that are easier to search and retrieve later on. So a daily email blast goes out with all the forum summaries. We have some planning tools, we have some sample itineraries, we have a map of the Great Loop that shows the route, and then also has clickable points, markers for things like our sponsors, but also for our harbor hosts, which are really great resource. They are members who volunteer to assist other members that are boating through their hometown. So you don't have to have finished the loop to be a harbor host. You can be, here in Charleston, and what they do is recommend services. So if you pull into town and you need a dentist or a dog groomer or a diver to scrape the hull, or just want to know what restaurant to go to, or many will go above and beyond and give you a ride to West Marine or to Reprovision. Some go way above and beyond and get discounted dockage at their home ports for members. But so you get access to them and a searchable map to find them. Member roster. So I spoke to somebody today who was interested in an Ocean Alexander and had questions about doing the loop on that. And I showed them how to search the member roster for gold loopers, people who have completed it, aboard an Ocean Alexander of that size, and they can connect with those people and ask them their questions. So it's, we really didn't talk about that, almost without exception. When gold loopers come back and we say what was the best part, they say the people. It's this really neat community of fun, adventuresome people. If you're a very high-strung type A personality and everything has to go exactly perfect, this is not for you.
Traveling at 7 miles an hour is probably not good for high-strung people.
It's a really fun, interesting group of people, which really is what makes the organization what it is.
Right. And you also host a lot of in-person events. You've got rendezvous that are a couple times a year. That's in RVer speak. That's like going to a rally. You have all sorts of seminars that you're presenting at. So if people want to learn more, basically they get an expanded version of this.
Exactly. We do one-day seminars, usually 4 or so a year at different points.
That's when we first met you, as we went to one of your seminars at the Rhode Island Boat Show.
Yes, and that was actually kind of an addition to the 4 or so. We do several at boat shows. That was a little bit expanded from what we normally do at boat shows. But yeah, several boat shows, several of our own day to day and a half seminars each year, about 4, and our 2 big rendezvous that are 4 days, meals included, just morning to night, filled with the Great Loop.
And one of the things that you do for the community that I am most appreciative of is the advocacy, because there's constantly anchoring laws and laws that impact
cruisers,
that states and organizations make that impact us without even realizing that we're out here.
Right.
And that's one thing that you and some of the other organizations step up and help with.
Yes, in fact, AGLCA has teamed with the Seven Seas Cruising Association, the Marine Trawler Owners Association, and the Fever Cruisers for the past several years to focus our advocacy efforts. It has been in Florida. Florida has tried several times to pass regulations against anchoring overnight, which of course impacts cruisers negatively. That has actually gone pretty well, and our members have generously funded enough in our advocacy fund to have a lobbyist in Florida, which it really takes in Florida.
Wow.
The surprise recently is that Georgia is attempting to do the same thing. And Georgia actually, because it's not Florida, Florida has so much coastline and so many boaters that it's always top of mind for everyone. Georgia's coastline is only about 150 miles. And it was under the radar. The law has passed and been signed by the governor that restricts overnight anchoring.
It puts permit fees
the
on
way
it.
It's written, the way the law is written, you cannot anchor. Well, it gives the Department of Natural Resources the ability to set the way to implement this law, which can include no overnight anchoring except where they say you can anchor, and a requirement for permits that the way the current proposal is would have small fees but still fees. And that's to anchor for even one night in Georgia's waterways, and that's whether you're a transient like us coming through, or whether you live in Atlanta and have a boat in Savannah that you just want to go anchor overnight with the kids. You would, even though you've paid for your boat, you paid your taxes, paid your boat registration, they're still wanting a permit and a fee to anchor. And part of the frustration is not even just the fee, although that's not acceptable. The fact that you have to go through the hassle to get a permit.
And that you have to have it ready for someone to come in and inspect on your boat.
And as you said, there's no welcome to Georgia sign. So if you're not from Georgia and you're not familiar with this law, you can very easily be in violation
without even
not having an idea. And this law actually makes it a criminal offense. A misdemeanor, more like, a speeding ticket than anything else, but still a criminal offense where it used to be on the civil side of the penalties. So it's a very odd law. I think we've made a lot of headway in working with DNR I'm expecting a revision to what they've put out there as the proposed rules. And I think there's a good chance that we can have some lawmakers when the session starts again in January, put in for some changes to this or a complete
With some
repeal
more
of it.
understanding of it.
The problem is, and since it went in under the radar and nobody was aware it was happening, is that they didn't get the feedback that they really needed from boaters to understand what the unintended consequences of this
and
were.
we just cruised through Georgia. This actually went down while we were in Georgia. And it's an amazing coastline to cruise, but it's
beautiful.
very twisty. There's a lot of very, very shallow spots, and that you have to time with this 11, 12-foot titles.
Yes.
And you don't always have a choice of where you're going to have to anchor overnight because you have to wait out the tidal cycle.
That is true.
And if they restrict...
It's definitely an issue, and I think we've had several lawmakers who have gone, wait, what what did that do? And we have one, in fact, we have a gold looper who's a member of our organization who is a current legislator in the state of Georgia.
Oh, perfect.
And he is, very willing to try to make the rest of the legislature understand what this bill has actually done. The
unintended
main purpose.
consequence.
I don't think that they were trying to punish responsible boaters. They're trying to keep the waterways clean, and they're trying to get rid of derelict vessels, which are abandoned and
which
sinking.
Are a problem.
And we 100% agree that those things need to happen. They've just gone about it in a way that didn't consider all of
those responsible boaters that are bringing economy to the cities they're visiting in Georgia and enjoying the beautiful coastline.
That's sharing the state.
And the comment period is still open for that, so if anybody's watching, there is a lot of information on our website, or Waterway Guide is kind of leading the charge on a lot of this with the information, and there's details on how you can still comment on this to let DNR know that these rules are not going to fly.
But do it friendly. I mean, these are
absolutely. and that actually is the key, because in today's social media world, things have gotten a little bit ugly, and that actually doesn't work well. That has the exact opposite effect.
Funnily enough, when you attack someone, they're not willing to want to help you.
Funny how that works. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for giving an update on that.
My pleasure.
I think we're open for some questions.
Yeah, so there have been a few questions that have thrown through, so I'm going to try using the little thing to feature some.
Yeah, we're using new software this evening. I see Ask Captain Chris.
Captain Chris is here.
Oh, hey, Chris and Elise.
Yes. And there's one question here. I'll pop this out and feature it. Tom asked, does it make sense to join the AGLCA if you do not yet have a boat?
I would say absolutely, and I'm not just trying to sell you a membership, Tom. There are lots of resources for finding a boat. Lots of people you can talk to. We have sponsors who are yacht brokers that specialize in the Great Loop, so if you're looking for a boat specific, and you used one of them, in fact.
Right, Curtis Stokes.
And for those who have never engaged a buyer's broker, it is usually the seller who pays their fees. So there's really nothing to lose by looking for a buyer's broker, Tom.
A lot, and especially in your shopping process, we loved being able to tap into the wisdom of past loopers about what worked, what didn't work for doing the loop.
The other thing, and I don't think you have had the opportunity to attend one yet, but at our rendezvous, usually 3 afternoons there is a looper crawl. And that is when...
Too many docktails, you crawl back to your boat?
Docktails are part of it, and hopefully there's not crawling back to the boat, but if you are, put your life jacket on first, please. But it's most of there's usually 50 to 60 boats in the marina that are there for our event, and most of those loopers will open those in the afternoons for others to tour. So if you're like Tom and don't yet have a boat, it's a great place to see lots of boats in one place. They're all loop capable.
Yeah, and how people have set them up. That's big thing.
Really the key. They're not all prettied up for a boat show where nobody's stuff is on it. A boat looks a whole lot different when you're living aboard than it does when nobody's on it. And the owners are there, so you can chat with them about what they liked and didn't like. So that's a great way to do it as well. And you do have to be a member to attend our rendezvous.
But, getting to access to the resource in your planning stages. We joined almost a year in advance of really actively starting our search.
Yeah, and I would say I call all of our new members just to find out a little bit about their story and make sure that they realize that this isn't just an online thing. There's people here to help. But I would say it's pretty typical for most people to join about 2 years in advance. Most of the people I talk to say, "Oh, we're not retiring for 2 years," or "Oh, we're we've got this coming up in 2 years, and that's when we can do it." So I would say 1 to 2 years before is pretty typical.
Because there's a lot to learn, especially if you've not done cruising before.
Right.
There's a lot to ramp up to.
So next question here. Let's see. James asks, I know you can do the loop in any boat, but does the AGLCA share any top models of boats that can have done the loop? It would be nice to have a short list of models that meet the height and depth limits to consider.
Ah, that's a really good question. We probably should mention those height and depth limits, though, because we didn't. There is a fixed bridge outside of Chicago that is currently charted at 19.7 feet. It's mile marker 300 on the Illinois waterway, 300.5. I think there's a lot of misconception that it's right in Chicago. The actual Chicago River has an even lower depth, but you don't have to take the Chicago River. So the lowest point on the Great Loop that you have to go under is 19.7. So you can't have an air draft higher than that. If you have a sailboat, you have to take the mast down, but it certainly can be done. Draft, there's no, fixed, this is it. As you have found out, Georgia and South Carolina, our tide swings can be, 7, 8, 9 feet on a normal tide, 12 feet on a king tide. So the shallower the draft, the easier time you're going to have in those situations. If you want to do the Trent Severn, they maintain it to a depth of 6 feet on a normal year. Right now it's a little higher. But if you draft more than 5, they will ask you to sign a waiver as you're coming through, and that's for real. I was there with a boat who was 5'5", and they did have to sign the waiver.
You might rip the bottom off your boat. Be careful.
Well, and that here in South Carolina, if you run aground, it's soft sand, muck, and most likely you're not going to do much damage, and it'll eventually float off. But up there, it's granite, so you really want to be careful.
Forgiving.
It is not forgiving.
And
so the question though was
is there a list of
boats.
Great Loop boats?
Gosh, there's not a list.
But if you want to start a long thread that'll...
Oh, boy.
Every time somebody asks that question about the perfect Great Loop, there's so many boats that
So,
can do
we
it.
asked Curtis when we started shopping, is there just a list? Can we narrow this down to... Because we wanted something that we could do the Western Erie Canal. We wanted... That bridge height was 15.5.
Right.
So it's like, isn't there a list of boats out there that have an air draft below 15.5? And
it was really hard to
seems like
find.
there should be, doesn't it? But it's a tough thing.
And also
really
because a lot of boats are modifiable and fuzzy. So ours, the arch can fold down, and you can get it down under. A lot of other boats, you can fold away parts of the top and
or
adjust your height.
you can unscrew things for the
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no fixed height to even
and there's so many boats out there, and there's some that are very custom and have changed. So I can see why there isn't just a list.
I really do wish there was, but there's really not.
But actually, what I guess you might have is a list of boats that have completed the Great Loop.
Well, and that is in our member roster.
Right.
If you're a member, you have access to that, and it is searchable by lots of different fields. So one of the fields is if you've completed the loop. But some of the other fields are boat make, power boat or sailboat, a few different things. So if you're interested in a main ship, for example, which is a very popular Great Loop boat right now, you can go in there and search for people who've completed on a main ship, and you'll probably find actually quite a few.
It might be interesting to go through that database and just order it by boat type and just see how many main ships there are, how many big.
And I have done that, and I'm trying to think of a few others that were near the top besides main ship. We seem to have a lot of cruisers yachts right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tugs are pretty popular right now, so the Nordic tugs, the American tugs. But there's really just such a combination.
There's so
of
many
everything.
different ones. I know.
It's a really tough question.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, we do. We've got Lewis wants to know, is a passport required to do the Great Loop through Canada?
Yes.
Well, to go through Canada, yes, but you don't necessarily need to go through Canada to do the Great Loop. There's a route that will avoid Canada.
Yes, there is. If you are trying to avoid Canada, either because you don't have a passport or you just, for some reason, don't want to do Canada.
Some people have past legal issues.
Yes, Canada does have even things that are not considered, a very big deal here in Canada. It makes you ineligible to enter the country. So yes, so you would basically take the canal system in New York. You'd take the Erie Canal. If you can get under that 15.5 foot bridge, you would take the Erie Canal all the way to its end in Lake Erie, come through Lake Erie towards Detroit, and then all the way around Michigan. Right. If you can't get under that bridge, you can take the Erie Canal to the Oswego Canal, which puts you out in Lake Ontario. From there, you have to backtrack through the Welland Canal to get you back into Lake Erie. Yeah. The Welland Canal is a very commercial lock system. Most people who have done it have not been real thrilled to do it, but again, if you don't or can't go to Canada.
Yeah, and the Welland
you can do
Canal
it.
is technically in Canada because it's what bypasses Niagara Falls. But
Well, that's
because
true.
but you don't need a passport. For boats going through it, it's considered you're never leaving the boat.
Yes, there
and
was a big
stuff, so,
discussion about that in the forum pretty
Right.
recently too.
So yeah, that is an international way to pass through Canada.
And the flip side, Canadians do the loop.
Yes,
as
we
well.
just had a webinar
Yeah.
for them today,
Yeah.
actually, specific to the because they're going to be in the U.S. for a pretty long period of time,
Right.
Which
we-
can create some immigration
And we just actually had
customs issues.
the Two Loons Cruising just came through here a couple weeks ago. We hung out with them and talked about the issues that the timelines and things that they have to follow.
It's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, the U.S. government has made that rather complicated for Canadian citizens. Who would have thought, right?
We got a question from Silly Rabbit about the Great Loop route, wondering why the route doesn't also include northern New England and the Maine coast going around Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and down the St. Lawrence River. And actually, quite a few people do that as
that is a
advanced
different loop.
side trip. Yes.
It is called the Downeast loop. And you say it's an advanced side trip, and I would absolutely agree with that. It's actually a little bit, from a technical standpoint, more challenging than the 6,000-mile Great Loop because of that coastline. Lots of fog issues, lots of tidal issues. However, it is becoming much more popular. There actually is a Downeast Loop Burgee that somehow before my time, AGLCA came to be the keeper of. So every once in a while we open a pre-order, and we just did that, and I think like 50 people wanted a Downeast Loop Burgee. I think we did it like in 2 pieces. You know, we did an order and then more people. Anyway, I think it was about 50. A lot of people, we've been surveying people about how they'll handle the Illinois waterway closure in 2020. And if you haven't heard, 7 of the 9 locks will be closed from July 1st through October 31st on the Illinois waterway.
Chunk of the loop.
Required chunk of the loop.
Yes.
There's no way around that.
Yes.
Also during prime looper time if you're on that seasonal schedule. So we've been helping people figure out a plan for that. And a lot of people plan to do the Downeast Loop, so they'll head up the East Coast as normal. The Downeast Loop is a summertime cruise. Usually takes about 3 months. Certainly wouldn't want to attempt it in the winter. So many of them will do the Downeast Loop and then head a little further south where they don't have to winterize the boat, and then start up again and go through the Great Lakes.
Yeah, we actually met some people at this marina who were heading up to do the Downeast Loop.
Yeah, it's become pretty popular.
And speaking of it, with the next question was, what about the Illinois River closing? So this is
There you go.
lock maintenance that will be happening, and it's happening. It's spread out over 2 years, right?
Well, some is happening this year, yes.
Okay.
It's spread out over many years. Some is happening this year, but the expected date for those locks to reopen, I want to say, is August 31st. So for most loopers, they won't leave the Great Lakes and come through Chicago until sometime in September. So for most loopers, that's okay.
As long as
for
it's
this
not
year.
delayed, it's okay.
2020 is a much bigger deal.
Right.
Because it's a longer time period. I have spoken to the project managers. Sadly, they really didn't care that this was looping time to come through. But they're sandwiching it between what is typically the spring flood season, which this year we're still in the flood season, but what's the typical spring flood season, and harvest, that peak of the grain harvest, because that is a commercial waterway and barges are moving that. And also they have to finish it before the freezing temperatures of winter because they're pouring concrete.
Right.
And
it's maintenance that has to be done and
well,
benefits
and that's
us
the other
all
thing.
long term.
It's much preferable that they close all of them at once rather than staggering this. It only takes one to impede your progress down the waterway.
Right.
So it's much preferable that they do them all at once.
So with enough pre-planning.
We agree it has to be done. I would much rather them plan it than have, we've had locks fail because of maintenance issues and
then
closed unexpectedly. So the only problem we have really with the whole plan is the months that they chose to do it, and they just simply don't have another choice.
And this is one place where the AGLCA comes in really handy, is that people can get this looking ahead planning and scheduling and things that are known, and take this into account in advance, as opposed to people who are just doing the loop on their own and just show up and they're like, what? Closed for the next several months?
We've got a webinar out there for our members
Yes.
on this topic, and we're collecting information from them on how they plan to handle it. The webinar kind of outlines 5 or 6 different things you can do, and we're asking our members to tell us which of those they're planning so that we can start to plan resources. So for example, it looks like about 25% of the people who have answered that little survey about what they're going to do plan to wait in Chicago until the waterway opens. It's supposed to be November 1st. It's very doable, and the webinar kind of tells you how it's doable. there's pros and cons to each of those ways. But if a lot of people are waiting in the Chicago area, we've got a sponsor out there in Hammond, Indiana, which is really just outside of Chicago, that's offering a great rate. We'll keep the electric and water on at the dock. And then as we know those people are starting to move through, if we know there's 50 boats there, they can't all move at once
Right,
at
so you
that
can
point,
stagger it
because they're
out.
going to get to the next stop at Joliet and there's not enough dockage for everybody. So we'll help them kind of stagger that through. All of the locks are closed for that period. Some open, there's some staggering there, but the whole waterway won't be passable until scheduled for October 31st. But we can kind of stage people at the first few locks. We've got a plan to make that a little bit easier.
Right.
And then to make sure that downstream facilities are still open for fuel and dockage and things like that. And that actually should be a little bit easier because a lot of the annual slip holders at some of those marinas downstream, the boats are pulled out by that time of year for winter. So there should be dockage available. We just need to make sure for our members that they're open and expecting them to come.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing that we can help with. Also, some will find winter storage on the Great Lakes. I think that may actually be a really big challenge because most of those storage sheds are typically pretty full with return customers every year. And snowbirds from the Great Lakes who typically take that river down towards the Gulf for the winter
aren't
aren't going to be able to. So they're going to be most likely looking for storage as well. So I actually think storing it might be one of the toughest challenges, but we can certainly help to try and work with some sheds that might have some room to get our members
And
in
some
there.
people are just putting the loop off for another year.
Some are putting it off for a year. Some are, like I said, kind of doing extended cruising on the Great Lakes. They have a whole summer up there and then store the boat or move south and then do a second summer. So that's a great plan.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I think we are caught up pretty much on the questions. If anybody else wants to throw any out, we might get one or two more. But this has been a really fabulous conversation.
This has been fun. Thank you for having me. Welcome to Charleston. And this is just great to be doing this at a marina on a boat. And like you said, we did our podcast. And usually I'm talking to somebody on the phone, and we did it right here face to face. So
This is
been fun.
fabulous.
This is beautiful. We're watching the sunset colors out here. We got the Ravenel Bridge.
The Ravenel Bridge, yeah.
Beautiful view right out of our boat. We just love being in marinas like this.
And we actually have a live studio audience today.
Who are also loopers.
Other loopers that we met here in our marina.
They literally ran into us here.
Almost.
And
The tides and currents here are
very challenging.
rather
sometimes.
challenging, but
Welcome
it
to
made
Charleston.
for a wonderful new friendship. So
This is loving this city. This is a great place to be.
It is. It's a great boating town, sure.
Definitely a boating paradise here.
yes.
Cool.
What does it cost? Are you asking about membership,
yeah.
AGLs? What does it cost to become a
membership.
member?
$79 for the first year, and then I believe it's $69 after that, if I'm not mistaken. And there's some discounts for multi-year signups.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, I think that covers it. Oh, there's the other question is, when are you going to do your loop? You know more about it than just about anyone. But...
Everybody asks me that, and most are kind of surprised to hear that I haven't done the whole thing. I've done parts of it, mostly because very gracious members invite me to come aboard with them for a week or
So
so
what
time
is
here
your
or
story?
there.
I mean, you didn't start the AGLCA. How
No.
did you get involved in this?
Actually, through my parents. They were pretty early members of the association, and when Ron and Eva Staub, who founded it, it had just grown beyond what the two of them wanted to manage, and they knew that my parents had a business and approached them about taking it over. And they were kind of looking for a retirement hobby, so to speak. So they did, and I my dad had been talking about this great loop thing, and I just didn't get it. I thought he was crazy. He was going to take mom and take her away from the grandchildren for how long and what, it just seemed like this crazy thing. And as part of that process, Ron and Eva came to our office. My sister and I were running the business at that point, and they showed us their pictures from their whole loop, and that's when I got it. And I saw the things that are out there that you're seeing from the water, and you're seeing the Statue of Liberty from your own boat, and you're seeing the St. Louis Arch, and but at the same time, you're seeing the small little towns like Florence, Alabama, and Beaufort, South Carolina, that you otherwise probably would never, ever visit. And I got it. So I started kind of on a part-time basis, helping with some things, sponsor program and things like that. And then about 3 years ago, when my mom was really ready to step back, it became my full-time thing, which is so much fun.
So we met you then pretty much right after you
probably had
became
just become
full-time?
I think it's about 3 years. Time just it tends to fly. But my looping plan is a couple years from now, hopefully. Still have one child left in the house. So he's just getting ready to start his junior year in high school. So once he is out of the house, I'll have a better opportunity to do some more extended cruising.
Wonderful.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We're getting a lot of people saying this is an absolutely excellent session. So thank you guys all for watching, and it's all about the audience too. Yeah. And here, I'll pop up our names one more time. So.
Yep. And if you're interested in the Great Loop the AGLCA, it's greatloop.org.
Greatloop.org. Super easy.
Yes.
You can go there, get a lot more information. This podcast that we just recorded.
Yep, that should be released on, and that's available to anyone, but
Okay.
it'll be released on, be Friday.
Great
At
Loop
10 a.m.
Radio. You can find it in
Great Loop
in
Radio. If you
iTunes and
search your
everything.
favorite podcast app for AGLCA, is usually the easiest way to find it.
And so it's a great way to keep up with what things are going on and
Yeah,
what you
and
need to
that's
become aware
free
of.
and open to anybody. So,
So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that comes out every single week, right?
I try.
They're about just like we have videos every single week.
Yeah, we try.
Kind of.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Some weeks it just doesn't happen.
You guys do so much and so much content and a lot behind the scenes that I'm sure a lot of people don't see the advocacy.
But it's really, it's a great group of people, which makes it really a pleasure. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
thank
joining
you.
us, Kim.
It's been fun. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Mark and Lynn, for being here. And Joe, thank you for moderating. It's always a pleasure. I know that you were coming in from Yosemite and probably had to go seek bandwidth to be here.
and see you guys all
See y'all next
out
time.
there.
Oh, sorry. Look there. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, peoples. Finish this. End broadcast.